Well, it's been revealed that nearly 50 commercial flights were forced to divert their plans because of China's military drills in the Tasman Sea last Friday. The federal government says China did not give sufficient notice but stopped short of condemning Beijing. Jennifer Parker is a maritime security specialist at the Australian National University. She says despite being in international waters, the Chinese ships were too close to a civilian air route.
Look, I think that we need to expect that warships do firings on the high seas, which is where these Chinese warships were. They were not in Australia's territorial sea or in our exclusive economic zone. They were on the high seas. So there is actually no obligation to inform Australia or New Zealand, for that matter, about this. In terms of how they've conducted the live firings, look, clearly they have been too close to a civilian air route. So when you think about best practice for planning a live firing, generally a warship would try and position itself at least 10 nautical miles, that's about 18 kilometres, from a known civilian air route. Given that we've heard from Airservices Australia that at least 49 aircraft needed to be diverted, that looks like they haven't done that and they've been too close to an air route. So in that vein, it is appropriate for the Australian government to raise with China that was, not really a good disruption. There should have been some better communication or certainly greater distance. In terms of the notice they gave, though, we just need to be really clear that we expect other countries to operate under international law. There is no obligation under international law for a warship conducting a live firing to give 2 days' notice to a country when it's not in their waters. Now, of course, you'd like to think that our relationship was close enough that we would give them a heads up or they would give us a heads up, but that's just not where our military relationship is with China. Normally, for a firing like this, you would expect a warship to give a couple of hours' notice on the civilian guard circuit, which is the emergency circuit that all civilian airliners maintain. Clearly, they gave that notice, but they only gave 30 minutes notice. And again, as much as they were likely too close to the civilian air routes, they also should have been up on that circuit, so on that comm circuit, earlier with giving a number of hours notice to those airliners. So that's not great practice. And so I think that they should have done those things and the Australian government is right to represent against it. But we need to be clear that we shouldn't be expecting warships in international waters to give notice to us about their live firings, because if we do that, then when we are doing those kind of things on deployments, China will expect that of us, and we're clearly not going to provide that.
Yes, so not great practice, as you say. So it doesn't mean that China is moving the goalposts here when it comes to conducting such live firing exercises, and this one being an unprecedented one in the Tasman Sea.
Look, I don't think China's moving the goalposts with respect to the live firing exercises. I know a lot has been made of that, but the fact is, this is what warships do. Warships, when they're on long deployments, do live firing exercises to maintain their training and currency. We don't really know why they did it. When we look at the nature of the deployment, though, the fact that China has deployed a task group down to the Tasman Sea, it's not visiting Australia and it's not visiting New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand aren't really on a main maritime traffic route, so it's clearly come down here to send a message. Look, that's something that we should be paying attention to and we should be aware of. They're demonstrating they have the ability to project their naval capability at great distance from their coast and sustain it there. And that's something that Australia needs to think about, because Australia, of course, is an island nation, wholly dependent on maritime trade, and in the event of a crisis or conflict, could be vulnerable to a naval task group interfering with that maritime trade.
So what could be that message more directly, I suppose, from China to Wellington and Canberra?
Look, the message is that in the last 10 years, China has developed a blue water naval capability, and they have the ability to project that to Australian and New Zealand waters and sustain that task group there. And that shows that their capability has fundamentally changed. And in the event of a crisis or conflict, they could hold at risk the seaborne supply, the maritime trade heading to Australia or New Zealand. And that's an important message, because it means that we need to make sure that our naval capability is up to the task of protecting critical fuel, food, pharmaceuticals, fertilizer, all of those things that come by sea that keep our economy going, that could be at risk in a crisis or conflict.
And of course, the federal government has stopped short of condemning at least the military posturing of these exercises. What do you make of the response by the federal government?
Look, I think that response has been wholly appropriate. You've got to remember that the Australian Navy also deploys all around the world we also do exercises in all sorts of places. Now, under international law, under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, you can do naval exercises on the high seas. You can also do naval exercises in other countries' exclusive economic zones, which is a zone that extends 200 nautical miles from the coast out to sea. That is really important because when we talk about freedom of navigation, that is a key element of it. So I think the Australian government's response to challenge China diplomatically on the way the firing was conducted is appropriate. But I think going beyond that would be hypocritical and would put us in a difficult position for the deployments that we conduct and fundamentally undermine the whole concept of freedom of the sea. So I think it's been a good response from the Australian government.
And I suppose, is there, a balancing act for the Prime Minister Albanese, given our trade relationship with China?
Look, this is the tension, isn't it, in the Australia-China relationship? We've heard over the last couple of years this narrative around stabilisation. And it is true to say that the trade relationship has stabilised and the diplomatic relationship has stabilised. We have communication that we didn't have prior to 2022. But the thing that we need to grapple with is that the military relationship has not stabilised. It has not changed. We are still seeing the unsafe and unprofessional actions of Chinese aircraft and ships towards our ships and aircraft in the South China Sea and Northeast Asia. And we saw that only a week ago, where we saw in the South China Sea a Chinese fighter deploy flares within 30 metres of a maritime patrol aircraft from the Australian Air Force that was operating in international airspace. So that hasn't changed. And I think we need to become comfortable with the uncomfortable because that is unlikely to change. China has a number of claims in terms of their posture in the region, their position on Taiwan, their position on the South China Sea, and their bullying of the Philippines, not to mention their influence activity in the Pacific, that Australia is unable to support. So we will always be clashing strategically on these issues, and that will result in an unstable military relationship. So I think we should expect to see, unfortunately, more of these actions from China in the South China Sea and more deployments down to this region.
Okay, Jennifer Parker, really good to get your thoughts on this. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much.